Hi, everybody. This is my audience for my informative speech, my wife and my youngest son. All right. So, today I'm going to be delivering my speech on a topic that I happen to know quite a bit about. It's a group of players that graduated from the famous Manchester United Academy back in 92. They were nicknamed the Class of 92. Finding, or should I say, using sources for this speech was kind of difficult. I grew up in England and I grew up with Manchester United. And so I'm one of those guys that kind of holds a lot of useless facts in my brain. And so a lot of this stuff I just knew, but something I used for reference for this speech was actually this documentary, and it's called The Class of 92. Um, so starting off, I'd like us to think back to when we were 12, 13 years old. And how many of you really knew what you wanted to do or even, where you were going in life? Well, the six gentlemen in the class of 92, they did. They were already well on their way to becoming global superstars and becoming athletes at the pinnacle of the world's biggest sport and playing for the world's biggest team. These guys that grew up together, much like baseball has, triple A, double A, single A. Well, soccer or football in Europe and mainly England, they have academies, and these guys they play for the academies, and then as they get better and they progress, they move up from the academies to reserve teams, which could be kind of like a double A, or a triple A, and then once they get good enough, they move up even further to the major leagues or the first team, which is what it's called in soccer. So the six members of the class of 92, one of them, most of you probably will know who he is, a gentleman by the name of David Beckham. Beckham, famous now more for probably his fashion and tattoos than he is for his playing career. But a lot of people don't know that David Beckham was a phenomenal player. His work ethic was second to none. And of course, he married Posh Spice. The second player was my favorite player growing up, a gentleman named Ryan Giggs. Giggsy was a Welsh team national player. His father actually played rugby for the Welsh national team. And he is currently the Welsh soccer team's head coach. Giggsy played a 24-year career. All 24 years he played for Manchester United. If you're a sports fan, you hear a lot about Tom Brady and how well he's taken care of his body. Giggsy did just that. He was one of the first players in England to introduce yoga into his workouts, which helped with the longevity of his career. Moving forward, we have Gary Neville and Philip Neville, two brothers who grew up just outside of Manchester. And it was always their dream to play for their boyhood club. And they achieved it together as brothers. Phil, the younger brother, is now the head coach for the women's national team in England. And Gary is a very famous sports commentator in England. Next, we have Nicky Butt. Nicky Butt was a midfielder that played 13 years for Manchester United before he moved on to other clubs in England. Coming out of the academy, Nicky was considered probably the most talented of the group. His temperament and his vision for the game were unbelievable. Nicky was also seen as somewhat of the enforcer. He played a midfield role and was famous for his hard tackles and take no prisoner type attitude. And last, but certainly not least, a gentleman named Paul Scholes. Scholesy, as he's nicknamed, was relentless. He grew up in an unprivileged area in Manchester, grew up with asthma, and he beat the odds to become a professional soccer player. Not only did he become a professional soccer player, but a lot of players from that era will tell you that they hated playing against him just simply because he was that good. A lot of the six players now own a fourth division team in England together called Salford City. But let's take you back to where the story all began. In 1992, the team won the FA Youth Cup, which is similar to winning like the NCAA basketball tournament or NCAA football championship. And after they won that FA Cup, they got promoted to the first team. And with the first team, that's when you start seeing, the big salaries and the TV time. And there was a sports commentator in England who's still around today. His name is Alan Hansen, and he was quoted as saying that Sir Alex Ferguson, who was the coach, was crazy and said that you can't win anything with kids, because the average age of the team members for that year was about 21 years old, which was unheard of. Previously, Alex Ferguson had sold some really big name players and brought in these youngsters from the class of 92 to fill their spots, and nobody thought they were going to do well. Well, year after year, they kept on winning championship after championship, and come 1998, the 1999 season was a very special season. It was the last year that I actually lived in England before moving here. And Manchester United were top of the league, coming down to the wire. They had to win this last game in order to become champions. They went 1-0 down and ended up victorious, winning 2-1. And then came the FA Cup. The FA Cup is a very old domestic competition in England. Again, going 1-0 down against Newcastle FC. Before coming from behind to win that game 2-1. And the biggest game of all, which is kind of like the Super Bowl of European soccer, is the UEFA Champions League. Manchester United were underdogs by a mile. They were playing against a German team, Bayern Munich, who were just a star-studded squad, full of experience, full of talent. The game was being played at the famous stadium in Barcelona called Nou Camp, and they went down 1-0. And in the dying minutes of the game, they were still down 1-0, and they were able to pull back an equalizing goal. And I remember vividly watching this game with my dad and my grandmother and jumping up and down on the couch with excitement. And before I could even catch my breath, we had scored another one. And so winning the treble in European soccer, as it's called, is much like winning the Triple Crown. It does not happen very often. And all 6 members of the class of 92 were prominent members of that squad. They all started in the team. They all contributed in different ways. They played defense, they played midfield, they played offense. And all together throughout their career, the class of 92 went on to make over 3,300 appearances for Manchester United. And in the process of those, over 3,000 appearances, they won 30 major trophies, winning just about everything that you can win in European soccer. The times in England were desperate. The economy wasn't doing too well, and one of the few things that really brought the nation together was soccer. Soccer fans in England are extremely passionate. You have one team, and that's your team. You don't care how anybody else is doing; it's just your team. But Manchester United seemed to kind of bring the country together. When you have an English team in a big European Cup final, everybody seems to kind of rally behind them. Tony Blair, the former Prime Minister of England, was quoted as saying in the DVD that I use as reference that although we lived in individualistic times, there was a unique capacity to be greater together than we were alone. And these attributes were really shown by the young players from Manchester United. And I think that quote from Tony Blair is still relevant today as much as it was then. And we here in the United States, we also live in some individualistic times. And so maybe every once in a while we need to take a page out of the book of the class of 92 and just kind of unify rather than going the individualistic way. Hopefully today you learned a little bit more about a club that I hold very near and dear to my heart. It's a huge part of my life. My kids watch it with me. My wife thinks I'm crazy because I wake up at 4:00 in the morning on a Saturday to watch the games. But like I said, it's just a very important part of my life. Thank you guys.